Hey Tech Heads, welcome to Mobile Quickie. I'm Dennis here in beautiful San Francisco. Today we're going to be talking about Google Sign-In, adding it to your iOS app, and we're going to cloud enable it with AWS Amplify, and then we're going to be using Cognito to provide the identity management for it. Let's get started. Okay, so to help you guide through this, I've put in a link to the blog that I wrote for this video. So I want you to follow along there as I'll do that the same here with step 1 through step 8. So log into that blog, and step 1, we're going to create an OAuth client and create a Google project. So we'll log into that portal, click on create an OAuth client ID, put in your project name. I want to type in Mobile Quickie, and next. And then your product name, this is the one that displays for those users when they're going to be logging into your app. So okay. And the next one, we're going to choose an OAuth client. For this one, we're doing iOS. So select iOS, and we're going to put in our bundle ID, the same bundle ID that's in your Xcode project. Hit create. It'll configure the project, and then we'll come back to these later. We can copy them, and we'll get back to the OAuth client IDs. Okay, so back to the blog. And scroll down, you'll see the next steps will be obtaining the client ID. So by default, it already created a web client ID, and then we created a iOS ID. And you'll see that here. Click on your project, and you'll see two types, a web application and an iOS type. The iOS is going to go on our app, and the web we'll use for the configuration of Cognito. So let's copy both of those and save those for later. All right, next step. Okay, in this section, we're going to just create a brand new iOS project in Xcode. So go ahead and launch Xcode, and we'll just walk through a quick single page view in Xcode. Create a new project, and then single view app, and hit next, and then give it a product name. And again, this organization identifier will match your app identifier. So I'm going to just do com.mobilequickie.auth It'll be the same one that matched when we configured the Google login. And hit desktop, we'll save it there and create. And that's it, that'll get us staged. The next thing, we'll cloud enable this. Okay, back to the blog, we're going to cloud enable the iOS project we just created. If you scroll down, if you haven't installed the Amplify CLI, do that now following the steps outlined. But for now, I've already installed it, and we're going to just amplify our project now. So cd auth demo into the project, and then we're going to do amplify init. And what this does is sets up, and it's going to cloud enable our brand new iOS project. So give it a name. It doesn't really matter for this environment. We'll just say development. And then this editor isn't used in this case. Choose iOS. And a profile is username profile if you're using AWS. This sets up your credentials. And now it's getting initialized, and it's getting ready for enabling it. Once that's ready to go, we are going to add authentication. It'll run for just a few minutes to make sure everything's set up properly. Okay, now we're ready. So we'll do an amplify add auth to the project. Let's clear the screen. And what this is going to do is enable Amazon Cognito user pools, and then we're going to be able to put in our Google login OAuth ID into here. This is the web identifier. I'll show you that. So give it a friendly name called just Mobile Quickie for me, an identity pool name. Again, it depends on your application. And then select Google. And this is where we're going to go in to get the Google Web Client ID. So scroll back into your credentials. And remember, you have the web client and an iOS. Copy the client ID for the web application, and then we'll come back here and paste it into the Google Web Client. This is what Cognito uses to federate the login with Google. And then for the iOS, what we're doing is copying the iOS client ID, and we're putting in here, and this is so Amplify can put this into our AWS configuration file for later, so we don't have to come back and go get that. So we'll set that up. And then go ahead and enter through all the defaults. This is asking for MFA, which we're not using. I'll set the default expiration for refresh tokens to 120, and then default through everything else. And now we're going to run Amplify push, which is building out this CloudFormation stack, which we just defined the Amplify and the CloudFormation template, and then we're building out the stack, and we're going to configure those resources. So this will take a few minutes, so just sit back and wait for it to finish, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, here we are in step 4. We've already cloud enabled our app, configured everything, and now we're going to go in and enable and configure the dependencies for the iOS SDK. So again, back to the blog in step 4, do a pod init in our project. So by default, we have an Xcode project. Pod init will create a pod file for us, and then we're going to paste in those dependencies into that pod file. So open pod file, and then again in the blog, we can link to that gist that provides all the default dependencies that we need to paste in here. So let's go back to the blog and click on that gist here, and that'll provide all those. So you just copy all those pods there, which includes the mobile client, the user pool, and the SDK for Google. So you see mobile client does all the authentication defaults for the keys. User pools does the same thing, and then Auth UI allows us to create this user interface for the users, and then Google Sign-In and Google's are the SDK for Google. So now we're going to actually build it and go get those dependencies. So pod install -- repo update will go and get those dependencies for us. And as you can see, it pulls in all the default dependencies that the other ones rely on. So now we'll launch the auth demo with the Xcode workspace instead of the project. And that's it for setting up the SDK. Okay, in this section, we're adding the AWS Configuration.json file. This is the one that was created for us by the Amplify CLI that has all our endpoints in there. And when we put in the iOS key for Google Sign-In. So launch Xcode and select auth demo folder. And then we're going to right click and we're going to add files to auth demo project. And we're going to select that configuration file that was created for us in the root of that project. So select AWS Configuration.json and say add. And then select that, and that shows us the endpoints that we've already configured for Cognito user pool, the identity provider, and now we're ready to go ahead and import the SDK. Step 6, this is where we're going to add the Google Sign-In URL scheme. And this tells the app to launch the Google SDK and provide that login information. So we're going to go and put that reverse stuff in there. It kind of gets a little tricky, so I'll walk you through that. So step 6 in the blog, you'll see here, we're going to update the info plist in our Xcode project. And I provide the screenshots in here to detail what's going on, because when we saw those web keys and the iOS keys, we're going to provide the iOS key in here. So we're going to do source code and we're going to paste it in here, but we have to do the reverse of what that key provides with Google. I have no idea what's going on there, but they just want to make it a little bit harder for us. So copy and paste this bundle URL types in here. We're going to paste this in as our info plist at the top here and paste it in. And now this is the com.google user content.apps. This is how it's displayed or how it should be displayed, the reverse of what you're seeing here. So if I copy this, I see 103224. It's got to be reversed. So it's going to be com Google user content.apps, the number dash and the number. So everything is completely reversed. Very important, or this won't work right. So I'm not sure why that's the way they do it, but just make sure you take that or the iOS OAuth key and reverse it. And I'll type in here and you can see where I've kind of bundled it up, but that's really important to make sure that URL scheme has the reverse URL for the web auth. So I'll get that in here real quick. And that should be it for there. And then let's go ahead and build it, make sure that's it. And now you can see that the client ID is a little bit different. I showed screenshots in the blog so you can kind of figure out if you're doing the right thing. Okay, move on to the next step. Step 7, this is where we initialize the AWS mobile client. The mobile client is provided by the AWS SDK for iOS, and it manages all the token stuff for us. So we never have to do any of the token refresh or any management there. It just allows us to log in with Google and then transfers it over to user pools and Cognito identity and give those users the AWS credentials they need. So in step 7, we're going to initialize the AWS mobile client in our Xcode project. And here are the steps here. We're going to follow these 3 steps. We're going to import the AWS mobile client first in the view controller. And you can do this in the app delegate if you need to, but I'm going to do the import into the view controller. So the first step is the mobile client. Then go back in here and we're going to initialize the mobile client in the view did load, which we don't have that function yet, which we're going to copy into here. And again, I provided the gist for everything. So I'm going to recopy this and make sure it's the exact verbiage. And then we're going to go back in and copy this entire function. And this is what the mobile client uses. So if the user state's not logged in, it prompts them to log in. If they're already logged in, it just spits out their credentials. So everything's here. Now it won't compile because we haven't done the show sign in, which is the next step where we're going to paste in that drop-in UI code, which is what the AWS SDK provides and allows us to pull up that information for username, password, or the Google sign-in button. Okay, let's move on. This is step 8. This is the part where we're going to add the Google sign-in drop-in UI. This is, again, provided by the AWS SDK that says we've enabled Google sign-in or Facebook or whatever it is, and it's automatically going to provide those buttons, and we're going to click on the button, and it'll launch that SDK and provide a way for your users to authenticate with Google. So we're going to add that drop-in now, and we'll be able to build the app finally. So again, follow the instructions on step 8, and I'm going to click on the gist, so it'll provide us the information. Again, it has the mobile client, the initialize, and now the show sign in, which is the part where if the user hasn't been authenticated, it's going to automatically pop up that sign in. And we'll paste it in here and go ahead and build it. And hopefully it should run just fine. And again, this shows us if it's logged out, logged in, and logs everything in there. So now, scroll down. Okay, so now as part of that drop-in UI, the SDK requires us to go into the storyboard and add a navigation controller. So if you go to main storyboard, select view controller, and then editor, and then embed in navigation controller. And this is because we just did a simple one-page app. We added a navigation controller, and this allows us to use the SDK to pop up that controller to show the login screen. And that's it. Move on to the next. Step 9, we build and run our app. Let's take a look and see what happens. Let's go back into Xcode, and we got everything running configured. Let's go ahead and build it and run it in a simulator. Now again, when you're finalized, you want to be able to run it on a real app, but if you log in, the user is not authenticated, we click on sign in with Google, say continue, and it'll prompt us through the login. So I'll authenticate as a user. I want to use my Google sign-in credentials, and I'm going to sign in, and then it'll automatically redirect back to the app, all staying within the app ecosystem, and then I'm an authenticated user from then on. So when I launch the app the next time, it will not show that drop-in UI because I'm already authenticated. Hit next, and then it's a white screen showing that I'm already logged in. So now we're authenticated and we can go do whatever we want with the app. Thanks. And if you like what I'm doing, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to be alerted when we drop another mobile quickie. Thanks for watching.